the fourth question. There are 4 places where the text is in bold. What is the function of the bold text? Now, this is really, really a key part of the essay. Okay, this is what you absolutely just have to do, and it's probably going to be the hardest part of the essay to write. Okay, now in bold, as you can see, there are 4 places where I have bold typing in the paper, and they're all in the body paragraphs. Let's go to the first body paragraph. So, before I started my drive to Memphis, dun, 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 dun. Now, the bold sentence says, like me, Orwell was also inexperienced in his situation. So right there, the bold lettering in each of these body paragraphs, that is where Jane, our student author, is drawing the comparison between herself and the author. This is very important, okay? Very important. You have to do this. You have to tell your reader how your 2 situations can be seen as a similar situation. I know this sounds tough, but if you look at the essays written by our authors, there are some basic situations involved in them. For instance, with Sedaris, right? Sedaris goes to Paris to start school for the first time. And he's in a place that he doesn't know, and that he doesn't know the place, and he doesn't know anybody who's there. And this is quite common for first-time experiences, right? Oftentimes you're going alone to a place that you have never been to before to do an activity you've probably never done, and you don't know many of the people there, right? So you could compare, say, your first day on you could compare your first day on a job, like a new job, with Sedaris. Or, I mean, even in this essay, she chooses to go with the Orwell, but she could have done Sedaris just as well, because Sedaris is going to a new place that he didn't know, and he was inexperienced in being there, basically. So there's a lot of options here. You have to think about the general human experience that Orwell or Sedaris or Hodgman is going through. And once you can see it sort of as a more general experience, then you should have an easier time connecting yourself to the author. And I hope that's one thing that the example essay helps you to do. All right, let's look at one more example of the boldened text sentences from the example essay. Let's go to page 3, the full body paragraph in there. As I started driving, the anxiety that I experienced melted away. So this is her just getting out the driveway and starting her drive. And she says in the middle of the paragraph, like me, David Sedaris also felt excitement when he traveled to a new and foreign place, right? So there she is using Sedaris. And do you see how that, in that sentence, she is explaining both her situation and Sedaris' situation in kind of a general sense. Like me, he felt, David Sedaris also felt excited when he traveled to a new and foreign place, right? The traveling to a new and foreign place is the part that she matches with Sedaris. That's her comparison right there, okay? Now, for most of this essay, her emotions, of course, happen to match the author's, which many of you will probably run into. Let's see. Okay, question number 5. There are 4 places where the text is underlined. What is the underlined text doing? Now, this is something that some of you have already done in the Unit 1 essay and the Unit 2 essay, and I think most of you can probably handle this. But the underlined text, obviously, it's part of the quote, right? But notice how this author, Jane, our student author, also, she never just drops the quote in, right? There's always a nice soft lead into the quote, and I call that preambling the quote. Set it up a little bit, give it some background, ease it into your essay. Don't just plunk it in and just say, oh, there's the quote. That's not what you need to do. You need to ease it in. And remember, these writers are very, very good writers, and they should be able to give you really strong quotes to use. So let's look at the last body paragraph here. So she uses her bold text and says, George Orwell, like me, also felt relief after discovering that he was not going to be responsible for the death of the elephant he had shot. Orwell explains why his actions are justified when he says, that statement right there, Orwell explains why his actions are justified when he says. That's preambling. It's almost like it's setting the quote up. It's letting your reader sort of know just what's about to come. So here he's explaining his justification. And afterward, I was very glad that the coolie had been killed. It put me legally in the right, and it gave me a sufficient pretext for shooting the elephant. A weight was lifted off of Orwell's shoulders once he realized that he was safe from any negative consequences of killing the expensive creature, right? So all of the underlying text, what it's doing is it's setting up the situation of the author, giving a little snippet of their actual writing, letting your reader hear the author's voice, which is important because these are good, interesting writers to read. And then also she exits the quote very softly, right? She makes it so that it doesn't just end, right? She sort of scoots out of it. She doesn't just let it end suddenly. Okay, let's see. Question number 6. There are 4 places where the text is in type font Arial narrow. What is this text doing? Okay, so this text comes at the bottom of each potty paragraph, right? And what this text is doing is it's explaining even more how the situations compare, and then it goes into how the emotions compare or contrast. Remember, you have to show how your situation compares with an author. However, you can compare or contrast your emotional reaction. I don't expect you to feel just like these authors felt, but I do expect you to be able to see the similarity in your situations, okay? So here is really the big explanation, right? In the paragraph, you've got your topic sentence, so you let your reader know what's coming. Next, you should have probably some sort of further explanation of your own experience, diving in a little deeper, reminding your reader of the highlighted event from the narrative paragraphs. Then you want to be sure that you draw some sort of quick comparison, one-sentence comparison between you and the author. Then, of course, you have to explain the author's situation and what their emotional reaction was. And finally, at the bottom of the paragraph, you do the really hard legwork of making sure your reader understands exactly how the two of you fit together, right? You continue to compare the situations, and you also make it very clear how you felt about your situation, how the author felt about his situation, and then whether they were the same or not. Okay, and also, just as a note, like for instance with the Orwell essay is just full of great emotions, full of really interesting situations, stuff that you can really use, and it's probably the most used essay for this paper that I've seen so far. Now, for instance, Orwell has a lot of really strong emotions, right? Like, for instance, he wants to stab the Buddhist priest in the guts. You may have felt similar to that, right? You may have been angry or really upset or wanted to just on somebody. And it's okay for you to state in your essay, I felt like Orwell, but not as strongly. He wanted to stab a Buddhist priest in the guts. I just wanted to kick my new boss in the shins. That way you can establish that it is a similar emotion you're sharing with Orwell, but it's not, you're not going to want to stab anybody, you're not getting real violent about it. You can make that kind of comparison where it's like the author feels really strongly, but I didn't feel quite as strongly, similar emotion, but not exactly the same. So that's usually a common one that comes up in this paper. And you can totally do that. Don't feel like it has to be exactly the same as the author or completely opposite of them. It can be sort of a lesser emotion than your author. That's perfectly acceptable.